Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to be talking about libertarianism. That's both with a small L and a capital L. I'll get to the differences in that after we watch this video. So the way the plan is going to go is we're going to have a small video. It's 8 minutes long. I think this video does a great job at going over the basics. And then I would like to answer any questions that you have directly related to the video. Then I'll be able to go over key terms and understandings of political philosophy, both as its application to libertarianism as well as to just standard political science and political philosophy. And then I want to have a huge Q&A. So really, if you guys have any questions or you have contentions or you want to debate or you want to do anything, please, I want it. I love it. I think it's great. I think it is educational for all of us to have this peaceful exchange, right? Rather than being online, just like, it doesn't, no one's listening to each other online. It's just an echo chamber. So we'll watch this now. And do you have any questions before we start? Anything? All right, cool. So we'll start this video. It's an Oscar award-winning video. Yep.
The philosophy of liberty is based on the principle of self-ownership.
Awesome. Okay. Pretty good video, I think. That's simple enough. So what questions do you have from the video? And then I'll be able to answer those, and then I'll get back in and I'll get into the lecture. Any questions about the video or any words they used or any phrases that you have questions about? Anything? Oh, good. All right, awesome. All right, so libertarianism, right? I mentioned earlier that there's a difference between the lowercase versus the uppercase. Right? So lowercase libertarianism is the philosophy of it. It's the philosophy of liberty, the pursuit of liberty. You are holding liberty at the highest of values. Right? Libertarianism with a large L is of the party, of the actual specific party. Right? That's the main difference between that. So what do libertarians believe? Well, essentially we believe that this is a radical movement. So radical, by its definition, means that it's the people freely choosing to do it. It's a societal move, not a government move. So not a top-down, but a bottom-up type movement. So when people say the word radical in political philosophy, it doesn't mean that they're crazy or outlandish. It just means that this is an idea that people can freely form these ideas and concepts. Okay? So life, liberty, and property. These are the things that libertarians believe should be protected by government if there is a government at all. There's always a debate amongst libertarians whether or not we want to have minarchism versus anarchy. Minarchy means the most minimal government that you can possibly have. Anarchy means without government, by definition. That's what that means. So it is a social movement. It is something that we believe that people should respect the natural rights of every individual. We believe that all exchanges and all actions are voluntary, should be voluntary, right? So voluntary in philosophy, it doesn't necessarily mean volunteering for your organization or your charity. It can mean that. It just means that all human action is voluntary, right? We might have inclinations that say we believe certain things, we feel certain things, right? We might feel love. We might feel like something like, oh, I really like that person, I want to go talk to that person, right? Well, our action to act upon that is voluntary, right? But the feeling might not have necessarily been. So voluntarism is core of libertarianism. State versus society. I put this here so that we understand definitions, right? The state with a capital S is equivalent to what we would call government or sovereign powers. Right? It is the monopoly over the coercive use of force. That's Max Weber, W-E-B-E-R. That's a very famous political scientist. So state. So it has a monopoly over the coercive use of force. Society. Society is much like social. It has no specific definition on the number of people that's in it. It has no definition as specifically as the geographical location of it. It just says specifically that it's an aggregate of people, I guess you would say, that are free and voluntarily there in that society. Or they're just members of the family and maybe they don't have the capacity to leave. So there is really no like type of, and people will use it a lot, and I'll get to that in a moment. I'll wait for a moment here on that. So society. We believe that this should be a societal move towards freedom and towards this idea of self-autonomy and ownership and responsibility over your actions, meaning the negative and positive consequences of your actions. You should reap those rewards and negative consequences. By that, I'll actually state this. Okay, when you first got your keys to start driving when you were a teenager, and you went to the mall like 1,000 times with your family all the time, when you first got in your car, did you ever forget, oh crap, I don't remember how to get there? Has this ever happened to any of you? This happens to a lot of teenagers, like where they'll be sitting in the car and they'll be like, oh, I need my GPS to get to the place I always go to, right? And that's because, so it happened to you, right? Yeah, he's honest. Many of us guys aren't willing to admit when we're lost or I don't know. So, I think this is a good thing to hone in on, is that libertarianism believes that you should face the consequences and you should have the political gauge, not the political gauge, sorry, the moral gauge and the capacity to reason in your life. And the only way that you're able to do that is by seeing the negative and positive consequences of your actions. That's it. It's much like science. When you're studying science, as Dr. Novak studied a philosophy of science, you don't say, hey, we're not going to allow these failures to happen. No failure is allowed to happen, right? We're going to prevent it from happening. That wouldn't be science, right? It wouldn't be science. You would say that we learned from those failures. We learned from them, and now we can make something better. And so libertarians believe that you shouldn't be bubble wrapped and you shouldn't have certain extra cushions around you to prevent you from seeing those consequences, negative or positive. As long as you're not infringing on the life, liberty, and property of other people, that's good. Hey, you went to PCC? Oh, okay. I thought I read it. Natural law versus positive law. Okay. So natural law theory states that we have natural rights, certain inalienable rights by definition from our existence as people, by being human, from either a deity, a god, or by nature, right? So we naturally have a desire to be social. We naturally have the idea of empathy. We naturally have the idea that we want to come together and exchange or to be with one another, to love one another, to have relationships of some sort with people. Yes?
Wasn't natural law used as a framework for John Locke's social contract?
Yes. So John Locke's social contract, for those that don't know, is written in the book The Two Treatises of Government in the early 1700s. It was also used as the basis for which the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution was written on his idea of social contract theory. John Locke's social contract theory is what we call the negative and historical type of social contract. And this is, again, these are philosophical terms. And I'll get to that, actually. Do you have another question about it? Because I'll go to that.
Oh, no.
Right.
Later, maybe.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I'll go. That's a really good point on the side. So natural law. We have these natural rights of I can live. I have the desire to live. I have the desire to speak my mind. I have the desire to have religion as I see. I have the desire to have an art as I see fit. I can do these things, right? As long as, again, it's not infringing on the life, liberty, and property of others. So natural law is typically understood as a negative liberty, and we're going to go to that here momentarily. I'll just go to that now. All right. So liberty. So it's your ability, it's your desire to do act as you please, right? Your liberty to speak your mind, your liberty to have religion as you see fit, or to believe the things that you wish to believe, right? Negative means that you don't harm other people. You don't put you don't force others into it, so to speak, that they need to pay, right? Just me simply minding my own business takes nothing away from your liberty to do and mind your own business, right? But positive liberty does. Positive liberty actually says that I am absolutely going to charge you something. I am absolutely going to force you into doing something, right? So some differences, some examples on this would be like negative liberty would be I'm just walking down the road minding my business, or I'm smoking weed and it's none of your business. I'm not driving, or I'm not like harming anybody else. Versus positive liberty would be something like, there's universal health care now, and we're going to vote to have that, and we're going to force you into that system, right? Because other people deserve it, right? That's what you're going to say. But libertarians believe that in order for something to be virtuous, and this is a philosophical thing that subject that many philosophers will go over, especially Aristotle is a great example, or Thomas Aquinas, and many others, is that a virtue, in order for it to be virtuous, requires free and voluntary action. Free meaning that it's free from coercion, free from being coerced, so not threatening people, right? So here's an example of that, right? And this will help us get into positive law here next. Let's pretend that Dr. Novak is sick, and we love him. Right? We want to. He needs money. He needs health care. He needs to be taken care of. And we need something. We love him. We want to take care of him, right? So what do? Well, we get together and we talk about how we're going to help him. And so what's your name? Joshua. So I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, I know I like you. So maybe I won't use you because I confuse people on the name. What's your name, sir? Brian. Can I use you, Brian, on this example? I'm not going to do anything. So Brian says, hey Josh, Dr. Novak is really sick. I really think we need to do something for him. And I say, you know what, Brian, you're right. I'm gonna go ahead and give him some money, and I got a good plan. I know how to get him on some healthcare program. We're gonna help him out, right? And that's a good thing because I freely and voluntarily did it. I said to Novak, I said, look, I'm gonna do this for you. That is a virtuous act. That in by itself is a virtuous act. But whenever Brian then says, hey, Josh, Dr. Novak's really sick. He needs money, dude. He needs health care, right? And then I'm like, I buy Starbucks every day. Can't pay for it, dude. I'm sorry. I don't wanna go in my pockets. I can't afford it, man. I got a weed habit, got my things. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to save up for a rollie. Not really. So then Brian's like, you know what? I have a gun now. Now put it to your head. And then he says, Josh, you have to, you have to, right? Because I'm forcing you to. Right? The act then of me giving anything to Dr. Novak is not virtuous. It's just simply an act that I'm responding to the coercion that you put upon you. Right? You threaten me. You say, I'm going to put you in jail. I'm going to fine you. I'm going to kill you. Whatever is necessary in order for him to get it because he needs it. Right? You're saying that you're willing to use force in order to coerce people into what is morally good, right, or ethically acceptable. Libertarians are against this idea of positive liberty, against the idea that people think that it's good to force people and threaten people in order for others to get things, even if they need it, genuinely need it. Right? And we libertarians believe that people will naturally still take care of Dr. Novak. We believe that there are organizations, there are religious institutions, there are kind people such as yourselves that are willing to say, you know what, Dr. Novak needs this. We're going to help him voluntarily. We're going to do this, right, without forcing other people to do it. Right? Thank you, Brian. Good job, Brian. All right. So positive law theory versus natural law theory. How many of you heard of the Nuremberg trials? Nuremberg trials. Oh, yeah, we got a couple of the history buffs. Anybody else heard of the Nuremberg trials? And you have as well? Cool. All right. Would you like to tell us maybe a little bit? Come on. You're okay? Okay. Would you guys like to tell us a little bit about it? Just a brief.
Post-Holocaust, more post-World War II, once basically the Nuremberg trials were when all of the Nazis were brought in trial and accused of being Nazis, of being affiliated with the Nazi Party, and at this time many soldiers denied it. They claimed that they were just following orders. That was their most go-to excuse. That
That's right.
I only pulled the trigger on the gas chamber because I was told to. That's my job.
Yep.
And for the most part, most people were convicted. Some people got out of it, and
That's right.
most higher ups were convicted as well. Those ones that generally tried to directly accuse Hitler of manipulating them.
Yeah, that's really good. What's your name?
Chris.
Chris, good job, Chris. Yeah, really good. So, after the World War II, after the time that they put the Hitlers, they put Hitler, they didn't put Hitler, they wanted to put Hitler, he killed himself. they put the Nazis on trial and they said, hey, you guys committed these atrocities, you did this and that, you took away the property of other people, you took the liberty of other people, you took the life of other people, how dare you, this is crazy, this is insane, right? And the Germans were like, well, everything we did was legal. And the world government's like, whoa, what are you talking about? It's illegal, right? So what the Germans did is they actually voted upon their laws before they committed their atrocities. They said, okay, we're going to take a vote, and you know what? These people, this group of people over here, they've been doing terrible things. I vote. Let's just kick them out. Let's start killing them or something. Everybody says aye, aye, aye. They changed the law. Then they committed the atrocities. So they said. So the defense of the Nazis was, well, everything we did was legal. We voted upon it. We have sovereignty like the United States. We have sovereignty like England and France and everywhere else, right? And Russia. Nothing's wrong. The only way that the Nazis were held accountable on their atrocities was by pointing to natural law, to say that no, people do have the natural right as humans to live. People do have the natural right to have the religion of their choosing, or to do with their property as they please, as long as they're not infringing on the life, liberty, and property of other people. That was the natural right of it, and so that's the only way that the Nazis were held accountable for what they did. Okay? So libertarians believe that these rights are inalienable; they cannot be infringed upon. But we adhere to something called the NAP, the non-aggression principle, also known sometimes as the non-initiation of force. Everyone that becomes a libertarian, and I'm not trying to convert anyone here today, I'm just simply telling you what the philosophy of libertarianism is. Everyone that becomes a libertarian under the official flag of the capital L, right, will sign something that says, I will not hurt other people. I will not initiate force on other people. I will not take the life, liberty, and property of others. Right? So to be a libertarian, you actually do have a somewhat of a informal type of contract where you say, you know what, I agree with this principle of not hurting other people, and I can defend myself. Just I'm not going to initiate the force. That's all. Now that initiation of force can be a war. It can be preemptive attacks. It can be, believe it or not, voting in certain patterns can be use of force. Now, why did I say that? How far are you willing to go to back up a law? Right? If you just say, well, this is a law, right, of doing this is bad, or doing whatever is a wrong, how far are you willing to go to enforce that law? Because if you have no enforcer to say, or an obligator, if there's no obligator to say you're obligated to this law, then it's just words. Right? If I say, oh, you're not allowed to murder here, and you do nothing about it when people are being murdered, then it's just hollowness. It's just hollow words. It means nothing, right? So every law requires, because of its definition, because of its association with the state, who has the monopoly over the coercive use of force, Max Weber again, every law requires the use of force, and it will back it up. Here's an example, right? Has anyone heard of Eric Garner? This happened a few years ago. Eric Garner? Someone said yes? Okay. So Eric Garner was a man in New York City, and he was standing outside. And the police came up to him in undercover, and they said to Eric, they didn't say his name, they just said, hey, you're selling loose cigarettes on the street of New York, right? You're selling individual cigarettes. They're called loosies, slang. I'm a cool kid. We're getting litty. So he's supposedly selling cigarettes on the street, and obviously, there's a government law for that. You're not allowed to do that. You have to pay that enormous fee in order to be an appropriate business to get that license. That's $50,000, $70,000, something ridiculous like that, in order to be able to sell cigarettes because it's such a violent act. So they came up to him and they said, hey, you're not allowed to do that. What are you doing? He's like, I'm just hanging out with my friends, man. I don't know what you're talking about. And the police just started circling him, right? Now, let's say that we were in a position that we did nothing wrong. Literally did nothing wrong. If we did nothing wrong. Let's say that we didn't even break a law, right? Or we did something that we didn't think was breaking the law. And the police come and start circling us and they start harassing us. You're going to be like, whoa, what is going on? I'm going to pause for a moment. I don't want you touching me. I want you explain to me what you're doing, etc. Right? It's a natural thing for most people. Why are you assaulting? Why are you stopping me? I'm not going to talk about my day with you. And the police came up to him, and then they said, you're going to wait here. They were going to get some officers to arrest you or whatever. He was like, no, get away from me. Then the police officer came behind him, choked him, pulled him on the ground, and he died. He died. Over selling a loose cigarette, right? So here's the part that brings us back to the point. is that in the state of New York, where it happened a few years ago, Eric Garner, that's his name, you can look it up, it was already illegal for police officers to use chokeholds on citizens, no matter what. They're not allowed to use them, right? Because in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and other arts, you learn about how sensitive it can be for certain people, especially breathing problems, heart problems, etc. He died of a heart problem, I believe it was. So it wasn't like the officers were intentionally killing him, but it just so happened to be an act that they did, right? But they were committing an illegal act by doing it alone. There was already a law against even police officers doing chokeholds, right? But they did it anyway. So the guy was recording, there was one of his friends, one of Eric Garner's friends was recording, and there was also another officer who leaked the information about the officer who committed the act, and the other officers. The whistleblower was fired. This is our government. The whistleblower was fired for telling the news and telling the FBI this is what happened. The officer who committed the act actually was let go. Not let go. Sorry, he was let go from the court. He wasn't charged at all. He actually continued his job and continued being a police officer. And that's because with every law, a government allows up to whatever force is necessary to enforce it. And this is why we see all these problems with police today. We see the police just killing people left and right, and nothing's done about it, and their unions and everybody else protects them and gets them out of it. And I would say that the radical movement of libertarianism is that we want to have less laws. We think that those laws, by their very nature, can create these atrocities. Right? It's not that the fact that the officer killed him is the first problem. The first problem is the fact that we believe that our ideals should be forced upon other people through the use of force, right? Through the use of state, rather than voluntarism, which is society. Society acts freely. State doesn't. Yes?
Quick question. You said we need less laws.
Yes.
But if we were to impose more laws, just hypothetically, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that, like saying, okay, you're not allowed to use a chokehold and more protocol, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that stop further acts?
But that's what happened in New York. It was already illegal to have a chokehold. But because the officer used it in a way to stop the person committing the act, right? Like you wouldn't tell an officer, hey, you're not allowed to use a chokehold on a murderer or a rapist. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't say that. There's certain times that you would say, do whatever you need to do, to stop that person. So by creating more laws, we're doing nothing but saying that the state can use more coercion and more initiation of force. That's all. That's all. So libertarians believe in the radical notion that individuals own themselves. And that's should be good on that side. Civil society. A lot of people will use this as a means to excuse atrocities as well. They'll say, well, we need more taxes, we need more laws, we need more regulations. Why? Because this is the cost of living in a civil society or a civilized society, etc. And they'll use the terms interchangeably. And you have to really pay attention when people start to use words and they begin to fluctuate or conflate their meanings, such as we talked about state and society a moment ago, right? So state is the coercive and the society is the free. Civil. It means, by its definition, of the respect of other individuals. Right? It means the respect of other individuals. In the philosophical world especially. So when you hear philosophers say, oh, they were civilized and those were barbarians, the barbarian isn't necessarily what we take today. It meant in the sense like, oh, they didn't really care about the life, liberty, and property of other people. They had no really system set up in order to say that how they protect those things. They just sort of socially did it, right? So that's why those philosophers say that. I steer clear of those kind of words. But civil means the respect of other individuals, especially as it pertains to the life, liberty, and property of them. Whereas society, again, is just the aggregate of people. It's just an aggregation. That's it. It's just a collection of people. I mean, there's no specific number on how many. If we called this a society, if we were all hanging out and we all had like certain ideologies or certain beliefs or certain like hangouts or like certain hobbies or whatever that we like to all partake in, right? We might call us a society. Right? Especially if we lived in conjunction to one another, especially if we interacted daily with one another, we'd call this a society. But let's say that we took out one person or we added 10 more people, we would still call that a society. So there is no really fine definition of what society is or what social is when you really break it down. So this brings us back to the point of justice. Of saying that libertarians do not believe in anything other than just standard justice of the respect of life, liberty, and property. We don't believe there's anything called social justice. And many people will use that word, right? Many people will say, oh, they'll use that phrase. They'll say, okay, I'm a social justice warrior, or I believe in social justice, etc. Well, you have to define what that means. If justice is a virtue, if justice is a virtue, and I think most of us agree that it is, that it's a balance, that it's a recompense of the wrongs that have been done against us, whether that's voluntary or involuntary, it doesn't require a connection word. It doesn't require to say, oh, this is a social justice. You know what I mean? Like, that again is just trying to impose one's own values over others. They're using that as a social movement in order to force laws upon other people and use the coercion of the state to say what morals should be the norm. Such as racists and others, or people who are bigots, or maybe they're anti-homosexual, or they are a whole slew of things. Social justice, by its nature, is trying to use the state in order to say what the ideal behavior should be, right? It's the use of force again. Libertarians believe if you want to be, an able and believe what you want to believe, you have that right, as long as you don't infringe on the other's life, liberty, or property. And last point, two last points here, and we'll get to questions. Markets are very important to libertarians, right? Laissez-faire, capitalism. This is a philosophical notion. I'm going to talk about the philosophy of it because this is a philosophy class rather than the economic structure of it, but I would be more than happy to point you to my published work on the economic part of it. But we do say that markets are imperative for the human flourishing. For human flourishing, and in philosophy, here's a Greek word for you. So you can be cool with your friends. Eudaimonia. 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 Human flourishing. It means human flourishing, right? And we're able to do that when we exchange, right? When we're not built in our bubble, when we're not stuck in this protected community where we want to build a wall and where we want to put these restrictions on who flows in and who flows out of our society. We believe that society is free and voluntary. It respects the life, liberty, and property of others. It is, by its nature, lacking of the coercion or the aggression or the initiation of force. So, with laissez-faire capitalism, we believe in open borders. We believe in the exchange of ideas. We believe in the exchange of products. We believe that you have the right to hire whom you wish, how you wish. That's between you two. That's as a party. No one else has the say to infringe upon that. Okay? So let's say Robert. Right? It's Robert, right? Brian? Brian. Dang it. Let me try again. Brian? Is it Brian? Awesome. All right, so Brian wants to hire me for $2 an hour. I say yes. What right does anyone else have to say that I can't hire, or he can't hire me for $2 an hour? What actual right does anyone else have? What claim does anyone have to his property, his values, my property, my values, my life? I mean, if I choose to get paid $2 an hour or $1 million an hour, I don't think that it's anybody else's business. That's a contract between two adults, right? It's consenting adults. We say this a lot, but we seem to contradict ourselves. I'm always searching for contradictions within myself. I highly recommend that you do it as well. You ask yourself, we're consenting adults. We have the right to do these things, to make these exchanges, whether that be lovemaking or whether that be a business, right? So libertarianism believes in that, as long as it doesn't infringe on the life, liberty, and property of others. Okay, what time is this class, and then I'll be able to answer questions. Yes, sir.
About the human consenting to for work.
Yeah.
Let's say you a person is hiring people.
Yeah.
And then the only person that's willing to do it is this person that is in dire need of money because their mom is dying.
Yeah.
So it's not entirely voluntary, wouldn't it?
Well, it's voluntary, their action. Their action is voluntary. What you just said, a great philosopher to look up who believes in exactly what you said is Rousseau. Rousseau said something like this, that everywhere we go, we're in chains. We're free to go everywhere, but everywhere we look, we're in chains. This is sort of a paraphrase quote of Rousseau, meaning like, I'm hungry, I'm poor, I'm whatever, I'm not smart, or I don't have the capabilities. So those things are binding, right? That's what Rousseau would say. I try to let students know their philosophy so you can read more in your own philosophy. But no, we don't say that that's, and libertarianism does not hold that is involuntary. We believe that your action of looking for a job and then deciding whether or not you want to work for that person is voluntary. Yes?
On that specific example, at least, like, I don't know about like other examples, but
Sure.
we as humans, we do have biological imperatives to preserve the herd, which includes our own parents. So, to a degree, it's, he's doing it willingly, but his, that person, this hypothetical person's own instincts drive them to seek out anything they can do to preserve their mother's life or whatever.
Sure.
So, I guess that, goes into what you were saying before about, in chains but free to go.
Yeah. So you have, you're not necessarily, that's a sufficient answer, but there also needs to be a necessary part of it as well. So necessary and sufficient is constantly echoed throughout philosophy. Of saying like, you're not necessarily attached to your parents, right? Maybe your parents are really mean people. Maybe they abused you. Maybe they abandoned you. So not necessarily do I have a connection with my family, right? I have a value system. I have a value. I put a value on that family, or I don't put a value on my family. Libertarianism has no say whatsoever on family relations. We just say, most people are going to take care of their family. That's all they do, right? But again, in a free society, you can go work wherever you want. You can do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting other people's life, liberty, and property, right? So medication costs would actually be going down, believe it or not, with a free society, with free laissez-faire capitalism. So you'd be able to afford your parents' medication more. And I'll tell you the reason why I say this is because in India, for instance, they make the same medications that we do in the United States for pennies on the dollar. For pennies on the dollar. The exact same ingredients, through the exact same regulations, through everything. But what happens, the Indian companies are not allowed to just come into the United States market because of the FDA regulations, and they have to pay millions of dollars in order to prove that their product works, even though the exact same product has been proven multiple times over and over again by other companies. They have to pay into this oligarchy, and then they have to have all these extra laws, extraneous laws, and then they have no competition in the marketplace, which is completely anathema to the whole concept of laissez-faire capitalism. It's not capitalism at all. It is the use of state coercion. So I actually think that within this, you wouldn't have a lot of these same barriers that you have today. Also, like experimental medications. If let's say you're on the deathbed right now, there's actually a lot of laws preventing you from just taking whatever medicine or whatever procedures that you want. Right? Over your own life. You're about to die, and some doctor says, oh, we have a new experiment, actually, I'm thinking about working on, I really want to work on with you. In many states, they won't allow you to do that. You're not even allowed today. That blows my mind. Okay, so what other questions do you have? I don't know. I want to answer them all.
I was quickly going to the markets again.
Yes.
In terms of unions, right? I already
Yes.
know that, libertarians are deadly against unions.
Well, it depends on what you mean by yes.
People like teachers' unions and whatnot,
Oh, yeah.
right? Okay. But going back to your example of the whole contract of working $2, right? Wouldn't a union, right, be another set of eyes looking out after you and giving you more rights? Whereas
Possibly.
where you're in a libertarian society, right? You only have the right of agreeing to that contract, right? But under a normal capitalistic society, which we have now, where unions are.
Well, I wouldn't call this capitalistic in the ideological framework. I would say that we're a mixed economy if we want to look at it ideologically.
Okay, you go with that. Wouldn't you say you have more rights under that? Because you have people looking out after you?
Right, and that takes us back to negative liberty versus positive liberty. I think that's a great point, Hassan. And it's in the sense of this. If you're a union and you voluntarily decide to unionize, and you say, look, we're as a people, we don't want to work for pieces of crap like you. We want to, we want more wage, we want more money. Cool, you have that right? That's a negative liberty. But whenever you use the government as your mechanism of coercion to say that you have a right to a job, you have the right to the job that Robert has employed with me, then we have a problem. In fact, even Marx himself talks about about unions and says that they are the petite bourgeoisie that they are just nothing but basically leeches off of the backs of the proletariat. So even under a Marxist argument, I can still say that unions are completely they're a coercive monopoly, especially when it is of government relations, right? So teachers' unions were against teachers' unions because they are a part of government, and then they're forcing their ideologies on the people, right? So that, by its definition, is almost like despotism, right? It's where the government says, "Hey, we got these. You know what? We want more rights, so we're gonna take those rights now, or we're just not gonna serve you, but we're still gonna take your money." That's what teacher unions do. And that's something that we're very against. And I think a lot of teachers are actually against teacher unions as well. You can talk about all your professors about it. Yes, sir.
So under the libertarian idea, the government would serve the purpose of only protecting these, right?
Yes, sir.
The property. Where would the justification for the justice system fit into that? Would it be punishment or would it not be punishment?
Right, it would have to have punishment. So under the minarchist system, you would have either private or public jails, private or public police, private and public or public courts, and there's often debate within the realm of philosophy on that. With anarchism, there would be no jails, there would be no police, there would be no.
So
Yes.
punishment fits under life, liberty, protection of life, liberty, and property.
Correct. Yes, that's correct. And also you could possibly add contract as well, which is under tort law, but that's also debated whether or not private courts could do that on their own. Did I answer okay, or what other contentions do you have?
So could there be a separation of punishment and just removal of society? So not with the purpose of retribution, but just to keep people from continuing on harming society?
Right. So if a person is like what, a murderer, or what would you say?
Murder work. Would a murderer be punished, or would they just be removed from society just to keep them from murdering more people?
Under a minarchist system, they would be put into a prison. We don't believe in death penalty.
Oh, okay.
Under anarchy, there would be no prison at all. You just sort of you can outcast them. Basically put a mark on their head. Especially like if you are committing an atrocity against someone else's life, liberty, property, libertarian has no problem with self-defense up to lethal force.
Self-defending.
Yeah. So like that, but you can't wait. You know what I mean? You can't say a day or two and take revenge or whatever it is. It has to be in the immediate point, and your whole attention shouldn't be necessarily to kill people. Is that our time? What time is this? Okay, cool. All right, we're good. Yes, sir.
I wanted to go back to that example you were saying
Okay.
about the guy who was put in the chokehold.
Oh yeah, Eric Garner. Yeah.
And you were saying that you think the idea that if we were to remove all this sort of regulation, then it wouldn't have happened in the first place.
If it did, it would have been a lot different outcome.
Yeah. You were saying that so couldn't you argue that you were saying that with libertarianism, it kind of relies on the idea of people will they'll rise to their own needs and organize how they need to meet them.
Right.
At a certain so with such but the government's job is also to protect life, liberty, and property. So police force is still around.
It could be. There's debate on that as well, whether or not you'd want it public or you want it private, and the funding of that would be then voluntary, if it is public.
And if it was private, then if you yourself don't want to be a part of or to be under the jurisdiction of that, just because everyone else agreed to create that, private police institution, but you never agreed to that, then wouldn't them forcing you to live under that sort of rule, wouldn't that be a violation of your own liberty and property?
Right, and that brings us back down to legitimacy. The same thing happens in this government that we have now. Not everybody agreed upon it, right? You didn't necessarily sign a contract that said, I accept these rules, I accept these regulations and these laws, or whatever have you, right? So the same can be said of that, but not to make a a logical fallacy. I will say that under the understanding of libertarianism is we have these existential societies that we go into, and we voluntarily enter them, and we sign contracts to enter them, right? So if you have a police force that's of that area, and that you know that they're committing corruption or you're doing something wrong, you would also want to make sure that you have insurances and other things that back up and protect you, and you have your own lawyers that you would consult, and et cetera, right? Human behavior, humans are always going to be evil to one another. Like, that's just something we have to realize. We have to realize the world is never going to be perfect. There's never going to be a utopia. There's never going to be a perfect place. People will always hurt one another. And that's an unfortunate aspect of being human, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. We can only hold people accountable for when they commit voluntary action, well, you can hold them accountable for involuntary as well, but when they're hurting other people's life, liberty, and property, right? Yeah. So maybe this conversation would be more in depth and a good book to read, or at least look over on YouTube. You can watch a small video, is Anarchy, State, and Utopia, which is a great philosophy book. But I want to answer that question a little bit better. You just have your own society that you live in. And so if you want to be a socialist, you have your socialist town that you want to live in, and you go into the socialist town, but the federal government's still there to protect life, liberty, and property and contract.
And if you're at a place first, and then another group comes in,
Right.
and
That would be infringing on the rights of others. That would be infringing on the property rights of others.
And then if there's only selectively, if there's only like, if any sort of like police force or any sort of like army or a group to enforce, you know, your own rights, if those are all like kind of self-made by the consent of the people and private, then if a group comes in, then would you not be having your own group that you've assigned to, like, you know, protect your own?
Oh, you still do that. Defense is cool. Defense is fine. You can always defend yourself. You can always defend yourself. That doesn't infringe on the
And if you lost, though?
If you lost, you lost. The same as today. You know, and the federal government then, in the same sense, would be there to protect life, liberty, and property. So they would go in, and other communities around them would most likely say, hey, you know, you're too close to us. You just attacked these people. We got to do something about it, right? We often create these ideas of boogeyman in human existence. I don't know why. How many people speak other languages in the class? How do you say boogeyman in your language? You know? You know that? Anybody know boogeyman in your language? Russians here, Chinese here, Spanish here? No? Armenian? You don't know how to say it? Well, look it up. So almost in every culture, there's this idea of a boogeyman. There's this idea of a monster in the dark waiting for you. Hey, you go in those woods over there? There's a monster going to eat you. You go into space? There's an alien monster up there to get you. You know, we create a super intelligent computer. Oh, they're going to be super powerful, all-knowing, all-being, all-knowledgeable. They're going to be a boogeyman. They're going to kill you. No government? Change of government? Oh, there's going to be this Mongolian warlord that's going to march in on his horse, and he's going to enslave all your people and rape your women. It's like we have these monstrous ideas. I don't understand it. And even after death, I'm sorry to the religious people on this. I do think it's quite ironic, though, in the same sense, or coincidental, that there's a monster, there's another boogeyman waiting on us if we're bad people or bad little boys and girls. And the only ones that are able to protect us under these ideas are these guardian angels, these gods, these deities of government, right? Where we look at government and saying, oh, you're omniscient, you're omnipotent, you're all powerful, you're all loving, you care, you're just wonderful, save us. And I'm against that idea. I think that we should always question when we have this idea there's a boogeyman, maybe we should wonder why we think there's a boogeyman first before we even try it, you know? And don't let a boogeyman stop you, a non-entity stop you from flourishing, from eudaimonia. Just doing my job. That was the positive law thing. Okay, so what other questions do you have? I know you're tired. Come on. Ask some questions, you guys. Yes, sir.
So natural law is inalienable, right?
Yes.
So does that mean it's impossible to give any of those rights, right?
You can give those rights freely on your own, yes, because you own them. You own your own rights. You own your own body. You own your own soul, or you own your own liberties or whatever property. You can give them away if you want. If you want to kill yourself, you can do that. If you want to do whatever, I mean, you can do that. I'm just not sure by definition you could technically enslave yourself. Yeah, I don't think that's what it is. Yeah.
Going back to markets again,
Okay.
for some reason,
Yes,
it's
sir.
like very fun.
Yes.
Laissez-faire, correct me if I'm wrong, was Adam Smith, right?
That is one of the people. That's not the first person.
Yeah.
Jean-Baptiste Say. That's
No,
third.
no,
Yeah.
no.
Okay.
But in terms of like free markets and free, just have people do what they want, where does libertarianism stand with regulation?
Oh,
like
no
in terms
regulation.
of no regulation.
No regulation, as long as it's not infringing on the life, liberty, and property of other people.
So that brings me to another question. If we look at the financial markets in 2008, right, it was like very disgusting what happened,
Totally.
right? Like
Totally.
it was almost fraudulent what banks were doing.
Yeah, that's right.
Then they imposed Dodd-Frank,
Yep.
and then that just almost fixed the problem.
Sure.
But under libertarian, right, would Dodd-Frank even have existed?
Right, it wouldn't. A lot of these cronyisms wouldn't have existed at all, but also the regulation goes before that. So we have to look back prior to, I would say look at Bill Clinton's policies on the affordable housing, and where he says that, and it wasn't until Bush's era, George W. Bush, who actually started really pushing the law, but it was actually created by Bill Clinton, where they said, well, if you are under a certain socioeconomic class, you still deserve a house, right? And that you still deserve a loan. You should still get a loan from the bank, right? Even if you can't afford it, right? So this is weird. And I'll get to the point. The 2008-2009 market crash affected me tremendously. I returned to school in my 30s, basically because of the crash, economic crash. I had a really good career in my early 20s in sales, and then when the crash happened, I was just devastated. And I moved to California. In that time period, the government said, "You have to give people loans. We will cover your bankruptcies."
Yeah.
The government actually covers the bank's bankruptcies. And this is why you'll see in the news where Bank of America pays 0 taxes, right? It's because they have a lot of write-offs. They have a lot of write-offs where the banks are getting a lot of bankruptcies, and then the government goes in, and your tax dollars, our tax dollars, your parents' tax dollars, et cetera, are paying for those mistakes, right? So no bank under a libertarian system would ever want to give a loan to someone who they don't think could actually pay it, right? Because that would not be smart with your own money. The only reason why you would give money to other people who can't afford it is because you're saying that it's going to be covered by someone else, right? There's no risk. There's no risk.
But wasn't there a risk with some things, such as Lehman Brothers? Because they were making loans, but
Yeah.
that went under.
Yeah, they were making loans. They were doing corrupt things. They were capitalizing on the corruption that was already instilled through cronyism in the government itself, right? So by having this, cronyism means that the government and the businesses are in bed with one
Yes.
another. They have like sort of incentivized one another. They have special benefits, right? Cheney is a great example of that. Oh my God. One of the biggest arms dealers, and then George W. Bush as an oil tycoon. So no wonder why I went to Iraq and Afghanistan on that, in my opinion. So no, in a libertarian society, if someone was giving out loans and they were giving out bad loans or giving out money that they know that the people couldn't afford, that's their own risk. They're going to lose their business. Oh well, that's the way it goes. We don't believe in bailouts. We don't believe in taking other people's money and helping you. We don't believe in these tax bailouts or helping corporations or individuals either. You do that on your own volition if you want to do that. So I don't think that the 2008 or 2009 market crash would have happened on that large of a scale. The libertarian model is that it's small and that it's voluntary, and that the crashes would be much more minuscule than they are.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
I don't know. But okay, so what other? Yes, sir.
You said it could be added as life, liberty, property, and contract,
Yes.
as in legal agreement.
Right. Yeah. That's the debate part. That's the part in the minarchist movement of type of libertarianism where we say like whether or not you'd want private courts to respect the contract laws, arbitration, or you actually want a government entity doing it. So I just like when I'm teaching libertarianism, I would just try to stick with like the basic things and not getting to the murky things. That's actually why I don't mention about police or courts and military and stuff like that, because that gets into a lot of debate. You know what I mean?
Like how would it be enforced? Like what kind of enforcement would you have over like legal contract?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that would be the debate. Yeah, exactly, 100%. Right? Okay. So, any other questions? I know you got questions. Come on, you're gonna talk all this trash. Like, anyone else before you guys? Anyone else so far? Before you? Okay. Yes.
When you talk about laissez-faire, like how it's a person's like choice to enter like a contract.
Yes.
What about like sweatshops? Because they don't have much of a choice, and then the fact that they're working in a sweatshop like furthers like the whole that creates like the economic disparity that creates like the suffering. So wouldn't like having sweatshops like be like involuntary or involuntary, like creating like suffering for other people?
Right. No, again, we would not say that because we think that an adult has the autonomy and the willpower to decide and the reason to decide whether or not they want that job. Right. You see the conditions. What was that?
How about the child?
Yeah, they have the right to work as well. We live in a privileged society to say that children don't work. Many of the people that are in this room come from countries that actually children do work on a regular basis, on a very daily basis. Their families could not survive without their children working. The fact that our children don't work in this country is not because government is so benevolent and so gracious. Thank you. It's that actually we don't need to. We don't have to. Huh?
Well, it wasn't their choice, the child's choice to work. Their parents push them into it.
Right. Yeah. If your parents push you into working, then you would also have to say that a child then is a person with full autonomy over themselves and has the capacity to write a contract as they so choose as well. Right? We think that's ridiculous. We think today, oh, that's insane, a child doing that, right? But at the same time, when we look at any art history majors here, art history. No? Okay, Jesus Christ. Okay. So yeah, this class is so smart. My school is like all humanities and stuff. If we look at art history, we look at actually paintings of babies, a few hundred years ago, then we actually see that they're little people. It's really strange. They look like little men or little women, just like and they have this eyes and they have the movements of full-grown adults, right? And that's because they had a different perspective of babies at that time and children at that time, right? They gave them autonomy. They gave them the personhood at a much earlier age, right? And I think many of you, when you were 15 or 16, I think that you had full capacity and had the ability to run your own lives at that time. Not 18. I think that this 18 thing is weird. Good.
But the entire reason we stopped thinking of children in that way because as we learn more and more about child psychology, we used to have the idea, we just thought that like they were just little versions of us, which is the entire reason like things like physical abuse became such a popular use because we thought, well, I understand that I want to avoid pain, so I'll do what I need to do to avoid that pain. But as we learn more about child psychology and child development, didn't we learn more and more that their brains literally do not function in the same almost like plane that ours do, that they interpret, child minds interpret things differently than we do.
That's right.
And so could you really say that while the idea of life, liberty, property may translate well to the way our brains as adult brains work, it's, like, not to say it's a different species, but it's close.
Yeah.
Could you say that like that would be an overgeneralization to say that they should be subject to the same treatment that we give to ourselves?
Right. No, I don't think that. I think that the question that you're asking is saying that it's a normative question, and then asking whether or not we should put a state entity that uses the coercion over it. Right. So I think that if, let's say, for example, what's your name? Sorry, Chris. Okay, Chris. So Chris, let's pretend that you have a kid today, then we get rid of all the laws immediately. We say, okay, now children can work in this country if they want to. Are you then going to put your children in the workforce? If they can cancel the laws. If they cancel the laws today, would you put your kids in the workforce?
If we were going to starve, yes. If we were not, no.
Right, exactly. And I think that's most people. I really think that's most people because we see a better value in sending our children to school and to our religious institutions and to like a chess club or whatever it is that the kids do these days. I think that's chess club. I know. I was a chess club. So I think that most people would do best for their children, right? But if we say that there needs to be a law in place to say how we protect the life, liberty, and property of children, then I would say if we're saying that we can, if children can work, if they can have autonomy in the decision that they make in the personal ownership, then they need to be respected of their life, liberty, and property just as much as anyone else, right? But if we're saying that they're not allowed to work because they're not a full persons, they're just a human, right? Then we have to say that still abusing children, like physically abusing them, is still wrong. So we do have to make we have to say that there is a law for like hurting people, hurting humans just as much as hurting people, right? I would say so. I would say most people would agree with that. But what is an adult? I can't tell you by definition. I don't think there should be a definition from government to say what is an adult either. Because it turns into a slippery slope, right? Yes?
So the purpose of government would be to protect life, liberty, and property. What
Yes.
if someone's, and they also have, and people have complete power over their life, liberty, and property.
Yes, sir.
So what if someone's actions with their life, liberty, and property affect other people's life, liberty, and property? Would
Right.
the government not be able to protect that?
Yeah, that's where actually you wouldn't want preemptive laws that are in place to do that. You'd want to actually just take that to court and have it discussed. Because I think the reasonable people would actually say, like, yeah, you did wrong here as an accident or whatever. We don't need to make a blanket statement law to say universally no one can do this or no one can do that, right? Because then that starts to stifle our society. That begins to be the GPS for our minds, that maybe our minds would be better off working themselves rather than having some entity that tells us where to go or how to move.
So individual basis?
Yes, yeah. I think that's the best answer, honestly, for that. Without because then what happens is now we see this in the polarization of Republicans and Democrats, of where right now it's becoming so polarized that each one is trying to impose their will and their values and their virtues and everything that they believe is ideal on the other person. And it's just this constant going back and forth, using the legal system against the other group, weaponizing the monopoly over the coercive use of force on other people. And I think that that's bad. If we just minded our own business, as Benjamin Franklin was actually going to make the first coin in the United States to say "mind your business." That actually, I have a replica of it at home. It's kind of cool. I think if we did that, we'd be much better off. I think so. We wouldn't have these problems and this polarization. Just live, dude. Just love each other and chill. Maybe I'm a hippie. Hey, go ahead.
But how can you be sure that people will default to that? Because there's been plenty of examples that, in world history of people will misdirect their own frustrations at one thing onto a physical entity so they can fight like a minority of some kind.
Sure.
That literally was Hitler.
Yeah.
Yeah, pissed off that, his not very great parents, got rejected from art school, decided he was going to take that out on every Jewish person in the world.
That's right. Yeah.
So and then people fell on, it only took one person, and then from there, he was just, Mein Kampf isn't some sort of, great book. It's not even written that well.
Oh, wow.
So, it clearly doesn't take that much. If Mein Kampf can convince that many people, can take advantage of their own insecurities and redirect that towards, an enemy that he decided he was going to blame for all of his issues, more and more otherwise rational people flocked to that. So how can you be sure that won't happen? And I know that you said the whole boogeyman thing, but right. Even if they're not always around, they are around.
Sure, boogeyman is always around, and I can also say that the same thing can happen under the current system that we have now. A boogeyman can still rise under the current system, right? Yeah. So I'm saying there is no guarantee. Life is chaotic. Life is this beautiful chaos that we have. This is sort of the Hindu look at the world, right? Through chaos, we have beauty and creation.
And if that chaos threatens your life, liberty, and property,
right, then you handle it at that time accordingly. You don't say preemptively. You don't start making regulations and say, well, what if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? These laws then affect every other action that humans have, and other flourishing and pursuing of eudaimonia. It then stifles that. So I'll give you an example, right? In the 1970s, the FCC created a law that limited the capacity for radio signals, right? Those radio signals, people thought, they're going to be damaging. They're going to be dangerous for people, right? It was on that technology that actually cell phones then were developed, right? Later on, right? But the cell phone technology had to wait another 10 years in order to continue to try to get the regulation taken away, right? So cell phones today could have been developed 10 years prior, because the technology was there 10 years before it was actually ever created for the public market, could have been in existence. But what happened was the government and people said, well, these things are dangerous. We need to limit them before it hurts anyone, right? It's a preemptive risk and a preemptive law. But the negative consequences is we actually are in lesser of a technological development today because of it. And we can continue with that. So for instance, with the airplane, many people for many years thought we couldn't go faster than the speed of sound. Why? Because the machine would fall apart. It would fall apart. You better not push that. You better not push that jet too fast, right? And so now nowadays we could have had actually. I think we could have actually been a much more technologically savvy and advanced today if we didn't have those type of regulations before. You know.
Is not being preemptive. Isn't there cases where it's too little, too late when you decide to only be reactionary? Because, like, I mean, if I'm just assuming, you know, this guy on the street walking past me has every intention of minding his own business, so I'm going to mind my business.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that as I walk past him, he pulls a gun on me.
Yeah.
The gun's already pointed at me. If I even move.
So you should just start shooting every person you pass before on the street? Is that what you're saying?
No, but should you not at least be maybe ready to have a plan to cross the street, you know?
Because that gun won't be able to reach you across the street? Or?
No, but it gives you a better chance of finding cover.
Yes. And that, again, is a free thing to do. That's a voluntary thing to do, and I agree with that, right? So you have the protection. You want to pursue things that are going to protect you and your life, liberty, and property, but you don't want to force other people to do preemptive things that might jeopardize the life, liberty, and property of others. So, like, I'm not going to, yes?
But libertarians believe that the Declaration would have a greater power than the Constitution.
That's a great question. The only reason that our U.S. government today has legitimacy is through justification. Yeah, so the legitimacy is through the Constitution. The justification was through the the justification and sanctification. That's usually how people break it down. But yes, so if the government does not uphold the Constitution, U.S. Constitution, then they are therefore illegitimate in their acts. Yes. So that's how they. I think. We have 1 minute. Yes.
I was saying,
You're good.
on the subject of the Constitution, was it not the founders' intent? Wasn't there many different times, this quote you can pull up from the founders where they said, "We don't plan for this to be how we govern. People govern themselves forever. We know things will change, and if this whole thing entirely needs to be scrapped at some point, isn't that okay?" So, in terms of upholding the Constitution, couldn't you argue that I just lost my.
I'm not a constitutionalist, so I don't really. I think a lot of things need to be changed in the Constitution as well. There's slavery in the Constitution for people who are imprisoned for any law. They can be enslaved. That against that. Against eminent domain. That's a infringement of property of other people. So, I don't really appeal to the Constitution. I was just giving an example. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you guys.
I'll put Josh's email in an announcement if you want to send.